This video is part of the Missouri Scholars Academy 2021 Comics, Culture, and the World video series. An interview with Kelli Hansen, Missouri University Library, Special Collections, June 12, 2021. So do you mind introducing yourself for us?
Sure. My name is Kelli Hansen, and I'm the head of Special Collections and Rare Books. I've been at Ellis Library for about 10 years now. So very excited to work with Missouri Scholars Academy.
What makes something special enough to be included in the Special Collections at the MU Library?
So that's a really good question, because I think you're right that traditionally libraries and special collections have not included comic material. And I think that's slowly changing. The collections here for comics were started in the 80s, but they have remained fairly small. It hasn't really been a collecting emphasis for the libraries until the last few years, when we kind of looked at our collection development policy and looked at areas that we needed to strengthen, and realized that comics were really an opportunity to strengthen a lot of areas that we're weak in. So I would, and I've done some research too on like how many libraries are actually collecting this stuff. Or, if you were, let's say, interested in Spider-Man, and you were a researcher and you wanted to find a specific issue of Spider-Man in a library in the United States, in a research library, how likely are you to be able to do that? And the answer is not very likely at all. There are hundreds of college and research libraries in the United States, and average holding for things like this that we have out on the tables behind us is maybe about 15 to 20 libraries throughout the country. So I would say, just about any item, any comic item, if it fits with our interest areas within our collection development policy and we don't already have it, then it's special enough for special collections, because it's probably not available anywhere else.
There's this world of research and care and curating that recognizes the value of this piece in our culture.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of talk in the special collections world about those hurdles that we put up for people to use our materials, like the appointments and the registration systems and all that, and how for some people that can be off-putting. So I think it's both, there's both sides of that, where we don't want to be off-putting, but at the same time, I think you're absolutely right, where it does kind of, you can get these things, right? They're still available. You can find them pretty easily. But when I am looking at this, I'm thinking, all right, we know that there were lots of different kinds of materials that were like this in the 19th century, that, there are titles that they're just gone. They're just lost.
Yes.
Like 80% of the popular print production, some scholars think, of the 19th century is just gone, because of the paper that was used to print it on, but also because people just threw it out. It was meant to be thrown away. Absolutely
Disposable. And then we even have the comic book burnings of the late 50s after, what was it, Seduction of the Innocent.
Yep.
It's sometimes strange to see those photographs of, gather all your comics and bring them down to the end of the block to burn them.
Yeah,
because they're going to ruin the world or ruin our children.
The items from the special collections you brought today, what makes them special?
Yeah, so a lot of them are here because the artists gave them to us. So the Beetle Bailey original comic strips that we'll see are here because Mort Walker gave them to us. They came direct from him. And same with McCutcheon. The McCutcheon story is kind of interesting because McCutcheon was a cartoonist, and a very popular, prominent cartoonist for the Chicago Tribune, who had a very long career. And when he passed away, his widow decided that she would, instead of leaving all of his cartoons to one institution, she would divide them up and leave them all across the Midwest at educational institutions. So we were among the libraries that got them. This was in the 50s. So they've been here ever since. Some of the other things, like a lot of the materials in the collection are here because of donations from collectors. So, professors, students, people who just love comic books, and maybe they're finished with a chunk of their collection, or they just want to see it have a good home, and so they give it to us. And then we have some purchases as well. So that's something that we didn't do with comics until the last few years, is actually purchase. But again, that came out of a reevaluation of our collection and collecting policies and practices, and how can we make our collections more representative of just, America at large, but also of the students that we serve and that we work with.
Take us through the collecting process.
So what I have tried to emphasize in my collecting over the past couple of years is, who's missing from this overall picture of comic art in the 20th century and early 21st century. And so who I found was missing were women creators and people of color and members of the LGBTQ plus community. And so those are the creators and the subject matter that I'm trying to prioritize in my collecting of comics. So sometimes that means buying direct from the creators, which I can show you a couple of examples of on the tables over here. Sometimes that means going through rare book dealers, where I have done that a couple times. And sometimes it just means not buying things on eBay, because we're not allowed to do that at this university, but going through, just your regular online comic store and putting in an order. We've also worked with local comic bookshops here in town to kind of fill in some gaps. We bought a complete run of the first series of Black Panther from the 70s a couple years ago, and we were able to do that with the help of one of the comic book shops in town.
Who are the people that request comics from the special collections? And what are their goals and objectives?
Usually we are using them with college students, and primarily they're using them for research. I know there are people who come in just to read, although special collections reading room is not the greatest setting to read in. It's very much a kind of work research setting. And it's kind of difficult because it's not a browsing collection at all. Like I mentioned, we store most of these things in cold storage, which is off campus. And so they have to be delivered to the library from cold storage. And that's because of the paper they're printed on. It's very, very cheap, especially some of the earlier ones that we're going to see, very cheap paper. And if we keep it at room temperature, it will eventually just crumble away. So those are barriers for people who are looking to come in and browse or, just kind of read for pleasure. Although, I have nothing against that. I think that would be wonderful. But most of the time it's researchers who are looking at either history, looking at either the history of comic books or what comic books can tell us about American history, looking at comics as literature or as art, and using them for those purposes. So for classwork.
How are the comics stored?
They're in acid-free paper envelopes.
Oh, okay.
And so they slide into those buffered envelopes, and then the envelopes are put into, I think at our depository, it's like these big, almost like drawers where they stand upright, but then they're kept at 50 degrees and about 40% humidity all year round.
What comic book exhibits has the library hosted?
So one thing that just wrapped up, actually while the time that we were closed during lockdown, was a 3-year traveling exhibit that we put together on kind of comics as a really long history. So looking at comics from like medieval manuscripts as comics, which I love, because that's like my emphasis area in graduate school was medieval manuscripts. And so I love to look at them as narrative or sequential art. So looking at that and then kind of taking that through early printing and into the 18th century, and then into early newspaper strips, and then into comic books and superheroes and graphic novels and all of that. So that toured around the country for 3 years, and then it got put in a museum warehouse. They very kindly held it for us for about a year until they were able to come back and ship it back to us. But so that was one of the examples that we've done, but we've done a lot of smaller ones on campus here as well. So Miss Mizzou was a book that a local author wrote about the Miss Mizzou character, and we collaborated with him on an exhibit on that, kind of drawing from the book and drawing from our collections. We've done Beetle Bailey exhibits in collaboration with some other places on campus, because Beetle Bailey is a big deal on campus. People who are doing, I have someone in my email right now that when I get back to my desk, I will talk to him about. He's doing a reprint of a specific newspaper comic strip and wants to have scans of some of the ones that we are have in our collection for his reprint. So things, scholarship and exhibits and just all sorts of things online as well are a big part of what we do.
And can you tell us a little bit about your current online exhibit that you have?
Yeah, so we redid our website last summer. We have lots of online exhibits on the Special Collections website. And just this past semester, one of the interns, who was an undergraduate student, so if you come to Mizzou here, this is if you're interested in special collections or comics, you can do an internship with us. She just finished up a project on looking at the John Tinney McCutcheon cartoons and doing a digital exhibit on those. So you can see her work online. You can also see all the John Tinney McCutcheon cartoons online in the digital library, which I think is linked in her exhibit. And there are some other past exhibits as well about comics and all sorts of different topics on our website.
Let's take a look at the comics you brought us today.
This table is a table of recent acquisitions in special collections, and I'll start out with this one over here because this is considered to be the first graphic novel by a woman. Her name was Elena Vokarovka-Ditrikova. But this is not something that you have to be able to read or speak Czech to enjoy, because it's a woodcut novel, so which means that it's just pictures. There's a preface here, but then after that it's just pictures of her memories. So the book is about her childhood, the memories of her growing up years. The other things on the table are examples of what I was talking about earlier with who was missing from our collections. And so I've tried to emphasize creators of color and creators who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. So, and then I talked about buying direct from the creators. These three actually I bought direct from the creators. So these two on Etsy, which is a great source for mini comics. This one is about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's The Walker by Melanie Stevens, which is a great little self-produced, so these are self-published mini comics. And then this one, Dancing with Pride, about dancing and gender roles and how do you navigate that, as a non-binary person, which this author is. How would they if you're taking a dancing class, how do you decide which role you take in the dancing class? And this one, The Puerto Rican War, I bought direct from the creator. And again, it's an example of a woodcut comic, but this one has words. So it's really cool. It's kind of, and it's reverse black and white printed. So that's an example of some of the, mainstream comics and also self-produced comics that we're buying. And then the rest of the table is kind of our a representative of our collection as it is now. So we've got, like I said, some woodcut graphic novels, although Lind Ward worked in wood engraving. And these I really do recommend. You can get reprints of them from Dover, so you can check them out. There's copies to check out in Ellis Library as well. But this is the first edition, and there are no words. You just read through, and the story kind of unfolds in images before you. We've got some pre-code, and I'm sure you're going to talk about the comics code in class. Pre-code, EC comic here, comic, I think this was 1955 here, so this would have been early for having the comics code seal on it. And then we're getting into some of the more recent, superhero comics. And I should say these are all donations. Like I don't actually buy anything Marvel or DC. I am dependent on donations for that stuff. And then on this table, I have a couple of boxes just kind of to show you how they're stored, but also show you how many of them there are. There are lots of boxes of McCutcheon cartoons. So this is an example of that. These are two that we use really frequently. So the one we got encapsulated in Mylar because we pull it out so much. We didn't want it to get damaged. And this one is an editorial comic on the sinking of the Lusitania. So you can see here the legend says 2 crimes, a merciless one and a mercenary one. And so this is the statement that he was making on that historical event. This actually ran on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. And then this one, this is a suffragist cartoon, and you can see the parade is here, the anti-suffragists are here, and the old men in the club are up here. And as the parade passes by, the anti-suffragist women get smaller and smaller, and the men in the club start to cheer. So, statement on that in that time period. And then Beetle Bailey, the many, many, many Beetle Bailey comics that came to us from Mort Walker. I got this one out because, it's a good illustration of how Beetle Bailey started here at MU. It's very recognizable, actually. This looks a lot like the porch on Jesse Hall. This looks a lot like Memorial Union. So there you go. There's Beetle in his first, the first persona of Beetle, I guess. And then there's a lot of little strips here. As you can see, this is what a daily strip would look like before it got printed. So they're actually drawn fairly large, and they shrink them down to put them in the newspaper and color them if they're colored, but they're not colored by the artist, or at least they weren't at that time.
Please finish the sentence. If I were a superhero,
If I were a superhero, I would be able to be in 2 places at once. Because libraries. Because librarians we're always all over the place, and there's always so much to do, and so many things to read, so many things to process, so many questions to answer. So that would be my superpower.
That's a great answer.
final comments.
I would like the students to know that Special Collections is open for them. We are appointment only during the summer, and I don't know if the students are here on campus or if they're
Some might be.
spread out. If you're here, you can feel free to come in. If you're not here, you can also feel free to come in whenever you're here. We love to talk to students. It's a big part of what we do, and so we try to be open and welcoming as possible. But yes, definitely stop by and say hi.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to Kelli Hansen of the Missouri University Library Special Collections. You've been watching a video from the Missouri Scholars Academy 2021 Comics, Culture, and the World video series. And as always, be safe, be smart.